Technology is great when it works. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm Renza from Diabetes Australia, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here today, as I always am, but especially today because I am joined by Christel Hendrieckx from the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes. She's a frequent flyer with our Diabetes Australia Q&A. So welcome back, Christel. How are you today?
Good. Thanks, Renza, for inviting me again. It's good to be here again.
Well, I miss seeing you around the office, so it's nice that we at least get to see each other through a Facebook Live screen. Today, we are talking about a new campaign that Diabetes Australia has just launched. It's called If I Had Known. So each year, tens of thousands of Australians are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I guess this campaign is really wonderful in that it is hearing the stories of people living with type 2 diabetes. And we're looking at some of those barriers that people may experience when it comes to them seeking support for living with type 2 diabetes. What I love about this campaign is that it is made up of people who are living with type 2 diabetes, and the way that it's being rolled out is that they have written letters to their newly diagnosed self, which is actually a really interesting exercise to do. I know that I've done that. I've written to my 24-year-old self about what my life ahead with diabetes looks like now that I know. So there's a website where you can go to have a look at these stories. But today we're actually really going to focus on, I guess, what some of those barriers really are when it comes to living with type 2 diabetes. Now, if you have type 1 diabetes, please don't go anywhere. This is a really important conversation for us to have, and we all learn lots when we hear about other types of diabetes. So please do stay and join. These conversations work best when people ask questions and when they're interactive. So please feel free to ask us any questions and we will get to them. But Christel, tell us, a lot of people with type 2 diabetes say that I'm a bit reluctant to use the term denial because I think it has quite negative connotations with it. But what are some of the reasons that I guess people might be really struggling to understand and accept that they have type 2 diabetes and what they might need to do to, for the best outcomes for their health?
Yeah, I agree with you, Renza. I'm not a big fan of the word denial because it's really a black and white word, isn't it?
It is.
And we also consider it, and also health professionals often consider it as a very negative attitude or reaction that you have towards a bad news. But from a psychological perspective, actually, in first instance, it can be quite helpful to try and forget for a while, because getting bad news, such as being diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 or type 2, you need to get the time to think about what it actually means, and you can be feeling very overwhelmed by very strong emotions. And so it can serve as a coping mechanism in these early days when you have to deal with these messages. It requires attention when this is going on for a longer time. But when it's an initial reaction, I would not be too worried about it. It's just making sense of what is actually happening for you.
Yeah, we've got a great comment from someone. Kerry says it's a process of acceptance.
Yeah.
That really, really rings very, very true to me.
And it's a bit like with grief, isn't it? You go through these same steps, and hearing that you have a chronic condition, it's a bit like losing your good health, if I can call it that way. So really, taking the time to get used to that new situation and something that is not going to go away.
I love that you're giving permission to people to do that. And I feel that sometimes that we're told that diabetes won't stop you. You can still do everything. It won't be a barrier. It won't get in the way. And then when we feel that we are feeling overwhelmed, it's almost like we're letting down the team. But actually, it's perfectly understandable to be feeling that a sense of grief or a sense of loss or a sense of and all the concern and worry that comes with it. That's perfectly acceptable and understandable, isn't it?
Yeah. So some people really go through these different steps, like grief and then coming to that last phase where you have given it a place in your life, and you're not really happy with it, understandably, but it's there and you have to find a way to live with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So We have somebody who's newly diagnosed with diabetes. They've just received the news, hopefully in a very gentle way from their healthcare professional. What are the sorts of things that might be going through somebody's head at that point in time?
Oh, it depends a little bit how you are feeling at this moment. Were you having symptoms already? Were there signs already that you were going to have, that something was not right? Or is it really coming out of the blue, that you were not aware that something was going on with your health? So it can be very different, actually. But for some people, it's really in these first moments about, this is going to change my life. Will I be able to do my work, to go on holiday, to do my sports? How about longer term? Will I get worse? Will I develop other problems related to diabetes? Am I going to manage with taking care of it, managing it on a daily basis? So, as I said, it can be very overwhelming in these first instances.
Yeah, and we have another couple of comments here. We've got one from Justine who says, I'm still trying to process being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 50 years old. I'm still in the grieving process. It takes time. It absolutely does take time. And another comment from Pearl, who says that she has just been told this week that she has type 2 diabetes. Pearl, I want to say welcome, but you know, it feels like there's often the way this is that this is explained, I guess, in a lot of the online community is welcome to the club that nobody asked to join. And I guess it can feel like that, but I do want you to know that you're not alone, because there are so many other people who are living with it. How important is that, Christel, to hear these stories from other people so that you know that you're not alone?
Yeah. It's very important to get that feedback from others, because you often think that you are on your own, that you are the only one experiencing these challenges and these emotions. And then talking to someone who is going through the same thing as you, then you will recognize and say, oh, it's actually not only happening to me. And it's sometimes amazing in my clinical work when I talk to people with diabetes that they haven't talked to anyone else who lives with this chronic condition. And it can be a choice. Some people don't want to share, or they say, when I go to these peer support groups, they feel it's a bit too negative and it's all about diabetes. So it's a personal choice.
I think that's such an interesting point to make. I know that there are so many different ways to get peer support, and it's about finding the community that speaks to you. And that might be, you know someone else with diabetes and you go and have a coffee, or you sit around the kitchen table and have a chat. It could be going to a support group. It could be participating in something like this and finding someone in the chat box that you can start to have a chat with about this. I think there's no one size fits all, is there?
Yeah, but there are also those people who prefer just to read the stories, like people's blog, or like now following the conversation, but not actively participating. But that can be as beneficial as taking an active role in a peer support group or on a blog,
and that's
or whatever.
Absolutely fine.
So everybody should look for what works best for them.
I think that's probably a good moral for pretty much everything to do with diabetes, actually. So, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, with regard to how people respond when they get the diagnosis, and I did mention it last time, Renza, when we talked, but I would like to repeat it. It's giving yourself the time to find that balance again in your life. It's not expected of you when you are diagnosed this week and you receive this news this week, that tomorrow or next week you're back on track. That's not how it works for many people, and it can take quite a while, and you have to adapt to quite a few things, and some can go fast, can happen in a short while, but some might take longer, and you will need to experiment with certain things. What can I do? What do I need to change? And going to the supermarket, for example, the next time, it's just paying attention. What do you normally buy? Do you buy something different? Do you look at the packages? What information are you looking for? And that's not something you do in one day.
No, of course not. And we frequently lament that, the fact that diabetes doesn't come with a rule book. It would be very easy if there was an instruction manual and go, oh, this is how I do it, and an Allen key or something. So it all was very easy to slot together. Unfortunately, diabetes doesn't play that way. So
No.
it is a very big learning curve, and that's okay if it takes you a while to actually to get there and to understand.
And also you might have times where it's really going well, actually, that you have the feeling, I found my feet again.
Yes.
But then something might happen and it throws you off your feet again, and it's a bit going up and down, and again, that's very common, and that's
absolutely.
Yep,
absolutely. So we've got a couple of other comments, and I just will read them out because I think they're just so important. It's hard to accept. You never truly accept it. If you try your hardest to learn how to live with it, that's probably a good way to go. It affects everyone differently. I think that's a really important point. It does affect everyone differently. And then another comment, I also think that trying to relearn my eating habit has been a challenge. And I think that that's often one of the things that we hear from people is trying to understand, okay, well, diabetes actually has made me think about making some changes, and change is never easy. Change takes time and it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, that we know that for sure. Changing a behavior is very difficult and it takes time.
Yep, absolutely. So if somebody's feeling overwhelmed after their diagnosis, what are some things that they can do to help with that, other than accepting and understanding that feeling that way is perfectly okay?
We mentioned already a few things. If it's for you, then talk to other people who are experiencing the same, who are in the same spot as you are, having diabetes as well, and having it had for maybe a longer time. I think that's a good starting point. Secondly, your health professional is going to be with you for quite a while as well when you live with a chronic condition. So looking for support that works for you. And it might not be the first health professional you encounter. It might take you a while to find someone with whom you have a good match. And again, it's important to have that good match with your health professional, someone who understands what it means for you living with this condition.
Yeah, look, this is a big part of our conversation today. So let's talk about this now. I am surprised to hear that people don't know that they can change healthcare professionals if they're struggling to find, they haven't found the right match with somebody. It's actually okay, isn't it, to say, I don't think this is the right healthcare professional for me to work with about my diabetes. It's okay to look elsewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so important, and it's probably also more common in the world of psychologists, because we often hear, "Oh, I saw a psychologist and that didn't work for me," and then people give up consulting one. But it might take a few tryouts before you find the right person for you.
Yeah,
and again, everybody has a different style, and some health professionals work well with some people, and for others they say that's not working for me at all. We have different preferences, different styles of communication. Someone really wants a direct style of saying, tell me exactly what's going on and what I need to do and what is wrong, while other people like to be more involved in their management.
Now, this is a comment that I really hate, these sorts of comments, because I find that they are just so difficult, but let's have a chat about this. So Tanya says, I was rocked by the way the doctor delivered the news to me. He called me at work, or she called me at work while I was, and told me I had to be on medication that night. No discussion or anything. Tanya says she spent the next 2 days in shock. Of course you would. I remember being at a diabetes conference once, and there was a panel discussion of people who had been diagnosed with different diabetes-related complications. And one of the speakers had been diagnosed with a diabetes-related eye condition. And she said that the way that it was delivered was that the clinician had was typing on the computer. So it wasn't actually looking at her, and told her this news. And she said she felt really, really dehumanized by that process. How important, and how do we get over if we've had this really difficult diagnosis, whether it be of type 2 diabetes or a complication, or type 1 diabetes? How can we work around that? Because I know that it is really scarring. Emily does say she's since found Tanya says she's since found a really supportive GP. So that's really, we're so pleased to hear that, Tanya. That's good news. But how do we deal with that? How can we work through that?
Yeah, it's really, when it is communicated in that way, that's really a shock. And it will it will take you some time to get over that and give it a place somewhere. But hopefully then indeed finding a health professional that does understand or has better skills, if I can say it that way, in how to communicate these different messages. And then even if you have been through that difficult process with another health professional, but telling the new health professionals what you went through and what it did to you and what effect it had on you, so that they understand that that's not your style, that's not what you want, and you want to have a different kind of dialogue.
So I should just point out, so Christel is the Deputy Director at the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, the ACBID. And the ACBID just celebrated their 10th anniversary. They've been in Australia for 10 years. And I can truly say, as a person who's been living with diabetes for 22 years, what the ACBID has done in the last 10 years has genuinely made a change in the way that we communicate about diabetes. And they wrote a fabulous resource. It's a handbook for health professionals about how to communicate when it comes to diabetes, you know, some of the really more tricky conversations, but also just, you know, removing the blame and the shame and the stigma, I guess, that is so frequently associated with diabetes, and in particular type 2 diabetes. So I think that, you know, thankfully this is now on a lot of people's radar, is that communication with healthcare professionals is critically important. Are you noticing that change? I mean, I think it's obviously different when you're a person with diabetes sitting opposite someone. But what are you seeing professionally about?
Professionally, but it would be great to do some research with people with diabetes, whether they also notice a change. That would be something that we would love to do. But we do hear, when we provide training to health professionals, or with the resources you're referring to, Renza, is that health professionals say, yeah, now I get it. Now I understand that I need to start a conversation with this question or with this comment, and listening. They learn that it's very important to listen to the person with diabetes instead of immediately starting giving advice. So with the resources we develop, we do get very positive feedback about, I learned so much and I immediately applied it in my clinical practice. Or they tell us some stories of people they work with, and they said we were not going anywhere, and now with these resources. And that's so good to hear, that then they find a way of having good conversations or helpful conversations.
Absolutely.
So, but it's anecdotal. And how do you say it? Anecdotally, it's not. We don't have the research data to support it. But and also, it's like changing our behavior, changing behaviors in your profession. It's hard because you were trained to do it this way with the guideline, the handbook, as diabetes is the same for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a comment, and we're going to then explore this a little bit. Comment from Kerry: the blame from society is everywhere. Even doctors, when they see that you're overweight and have type 2 diabetes, their attitude changes. So let's talk a little bit about the guilt and the blame. One of the really interesting things that I saw in some of the letters that people wrote to themselves was really focusing on this. And what actually broke my heart in some ways was people who were still blaming themselves. You know, you didn't look after yourself. You didn't prioritize your health. Now, I mean, these are really big and difficult things to deal with. We're never kind enough to ourselves, and it's always very difficult when this blame and shame is coming elsewhere. Why is there so much blame and shame and stigma associated with type 2 diabetes?
That's a good question. Probably there are many probably why that is, but we do know that it comes from different sources, isn't it? As you mentioned, it can be health professionals. It's also the media, the way they talk about, for example, obesity. It's all about the person's responsibility because they have a choice in what they eat and what they buy. But it's so much more complex. There are so many factors involved. But that's still the way we talk about, like, for example, obesity and type 2 diabetes as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the reasons why this campaign is so important, is because we are actually hearing from people and hearing their stories. Now, I work at Diabetes Australia, and we frequently ask people to tell their stories. We want case studies. It's a lot easier to find people with type 1 diabetes. And as a diabetes advocate in the diabetes online community, there are far more people with type 1 who are very happy to put up our hands and tell our stories. Because even though there is stigma associated with all types of diabetes, we often don't have the same blame and shame with the diagnosis of type 1. And I think we just need to stop it with all sorts of diabetes. I always say all diabetes sucks, so nobody asks to get any sort of diabetes. And I think that that's probably a good starting point to hopefully try and change some of these attitudes.
And yeah, as you said, there is health professionals, there is still a way to go for many of them as well, because they often confirm these stereotypes that live in the communities and in the media about type 2 diabetes. And what is happening then, that people cannot be honest with their health professional because they fear that they will be told off, or you're not doing what I'm telling you to do, and you should change your diet, or you should lose weight or do exercise, which is not really motivating.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, everybody, we've probably got about 10, 15 minutes to go here. So if you do have any questions, please make sure that you do ask them, because we would love to be able to get to them. But Christel, what if somebody is feeling that, they are feeling guilt, they are blaming themselves? What are the sorts of conversations that we can have to help people stop feeling that way?
First of all, I would say to the person, think for a minute about what you're saying. Why are you saying you feel guilty or you blame yourself? And because diabetes and managing diabetes is complex, there are so many factors that play a role in your glycemia, in your glucose levels, that what you can do yourself is only one part of it. There are so many factors that you can't change yourself. So when I read that people say, I feel guilty about where my blood glucose levels sit, and the first thing I would say to them, think about what would be reasons why you feel guilty. Because of what I just said, there are so many factors that can have an impact on your blood glucose levels. I think also developing some kind of response to people in your environment. Think about it in advance. If you get a certain comment that you are not pleased with, be in a strong position to respond to those people. And it's often explaining to them what it actually means for you to live and manage your diabetes. And I must be honest, when I started working in diabetes area, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anyone in my environment who had diabetes. And me, myself, I thought it's a chronic condition, but it's easy to manage with some medication and insulin. And you watch out for what you eat. And that's the idea how I started in this field as well. But then listening to the stories of people living with it, then you really get the true nature of the condition.
Well, you're not like that now, Christel. I know that, you're absolutely not like that now. You're wonderfully understanding about what it's like, which is terrific. But I think that I really struggle. Somebody once said to me, when I was feeling quite negative and speaking quite negatively about myself, and I'm a bad person with diabetes, and they said, would you ever speak to a friend with diabetes that way? And I thought, no, of course I wouldn't. I would tell them to stop being so hard on themselves and give themselves a break. And I think that that's often a good way. Talk to yourself the way you would speak to somebody that you love about diabetes.
Actually, that's a strategy we use in our clinical practice as well. And like writing a letter to yourself, that's another good way of doing this. And also saying, is that what you would say to a best friend who is in the situation you are in?
Absolutely.
These are techniques that are really very helpful.
Yeah, I think they're really important. Diabetes is hard enough without us piling on ourselves as well about that. Christel, if somebody is feeling, though, very overwhelmed, they're really, really struggling, one of the things that we hear is that, unfortunately, people often aren't referred to a psychologist. So, or even their diabetes healthcare professionals are not speaking with them about the emotional burden of diabetes. why is that? Why is it, you know, I can still remember being diagnosed and told, now you will have a diabetes educator, an endocrinologist, a dietitian, you'll see a podiatrist, you'll see an ophthalmologist, all of these things. And no one ever said to me, and by the way, it might be really good if we have a psychologist there for you as well. I had to learn that. In fact, I had a healthcare professional a number of years later, my endocrinologist referred me to somebody, but no one had said that actually a psychologist might need to make up part of my healthcare team.
Yeah.
Why is that? And is that changing?
Yeah, we try to convey that message, what the role of a psychologist can be in the area of diabetes. And I think there is still a limited understanding of the role we can play when you live with a condition. And it's not only about emotional, like depression or anxiety or eating disorders, not a more mental illness kind of problems you encounter, but really talking about changing your behaviors and see how you can fit in your management into your daily life and find solutions for some challenges you encounter. And that's an aspect of diabetes that psychologists can help you with as well. So it's not only about, or not only for mental illnesses, but for the day-to-day challenges you experience. And I would like to mention that together with NDSS, we have developed an NDSS fact sheet about the role of psychologists in diabetes, and we explained we talked to some of the myths that still go around related to looking for psychological care. So if people are encountering that difficulty, that barrier, I think that's a good starting point to read the leaflet, which is freely downloadable from NDSS.
We'll make sure we add the link in the comments section of today's chat. Yeah, so, and the chat remains there, so you can go back and look at it at any time, but we'll make sure that we pop that link there so that people can see it, because I think that's really important. But if somebody thinks that perhaps actually, and it hasn't been suggested or recommended to them that they do see a psychologist, is this a conversation that a person with diabetes can have with their GP and say, perhaps, could you help me find a psychologist? Is that the best way to go?
Yeah, that would be a first point. You can look up on internet on some of the professional websites, which are listed in the leaflet as well, to look for psychologists in your area and with diabetes experience or interest. Yep. And also now with the telehealth counseling, it makes it easier to find a psychologist with an expertise in diabetes, because you don't have to go and see them somewhere else far away from where you live. So that makes it easier. Yeah.
If anybody has any final comments or questions, please do add them, because we will be wrapping up quite shortly. So last chance to ask Christel a question. And really, well, we've got a captive audience, we should be using her. Yes, sorry, Christel.
I would like to say a few things about the campaign or the
please do.
Campaign, because when I saw that, if I had known, that was so familiar to me, counseling people with diabetes in the clinic. I've heard it so many times when they received the news that they were developing a complication of their diabetes. And so, and when I was reading the letters that people were writing to themselves, again, that resonated with me, remembering the stories that people have been telling me. It's about, again, blaming yourself for, I should have done it differently. I should have paid more attention to my health. And what I would like to give to people who are listening today, yes, okay, what you have lost now at this stage in your life with developing a complication, that's probably, yes, that can be treated and maybe stabilized, but it's looking to the future. You might have missed a clue, or you might have missed an opportunity, but you still have your future. So talk today or think today about what you can do from today on to prevent developing more or more severe complications. So not sitting or getting stuck in that denial phase or blaming phase of what is happening today, but looking further down the track and saying, okay, what can I change to make sure that this is not going to happen to me, or that I can stabilize what is happening to me now? So more positive approach and not blaming yourself about what has happened in the past or what you haven't done in the past.
I think that's so important. I also think that we have for so long really done a great disservice in a lot of the ways that we've communicated about diabetes, and complications is a great one, but also a diagnosis type 2. We sort of talk about it as if that's where it ends, whereas actually we have our whole lives ahead after that, whether it be after a diagnosis of diabetes or a complication. It's not that life stops then, it keeps going. And we can always focus on what we could have done better and what we did wrong, but that's not going to change anything. But we can make changes moving forwards, and that's probably where we just don't know how to focus our attention on, okay, well, what comes next, what's next?
And instead of seeing it as a failure, seeing it as a learning, what can you learn from your past that you can change now for the future? And stay away from that blame and shame, because that's not really helpful.
It's not. And again, it just does come back to, if you had a friend who was saying that they were, a bad person because they hadn't eaten properly, or they hadn't done this properly, or they hadn't done that properly, or whatever, you would tell them to be kinder. And I think that it almost seems just such a cliche, be kind, but actually it is really, really important that we are kinder to ourselves, and we're kind to other people with diabetes and other health conditions, and just leave the judgment at the door. It serves no one. Yeah, absolutely. Christel, have you got any final comments that you would like to share with us, or is there anything more that you would like to say? I'm so excited about this campaign, and I'm thrilled that that we've been able to talk about it today. But what are your parting words of wisdom to people newly diagnosed or have been living with diabetes for a while? What would you say?
Well, I would say, looking at the campaign, write that letter to yourself.
Yes.
I think it's going to be a very interesting thing to do. And reading afterwards then what you have been writing, because people were asked to write to themselves when they were much more younger, was it?
Or when they were diagnosed. So, and that could have been 5 years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So
and I would definitely recommend other people to do that as well.
I think it's such a really useful way also to learn just how far you've come. When you start to talk about things and you say, look, it might get really, really tough, and yes, there were some really hard periods, but you got out of it, and this is what you learnt in there. And that's a really great way to understand just what it is that you've managed to achieve. I genuinely think that we should all be handed medals and tiaras and sashes and all sorts of things, because living with the chronic health condition is a tough gig. It really is. So celebrate what you're doing well, and acknowledge the stuff that you wish you could have changed but you can't. So learn from that.
I was going to say in that letter, not only write about the things that didn't go as you had planned, but also the things that went as you had planned and you're very happy with, and things that work for you.
We can celebrate diabetes as well. I know it's a really tough thing, and I know that there are days where we're tearing our hair out and it's just so difficult, but we can actually celebrate the days where we feel that we've really managed to tame that monster, and that's perfectly okay to say, hey, I did it today. That's a really great thing to do. Good. So Emily will have the link to the campaign. It's all the details. It's ifihadknown.com.au, but please do go and have a read. Do write that letter to yourself, share it with us. We'd love to see it, but do take the time to do that. And maybe also have a chat with someone. I just wanted to suggest one other thing. And Christel was talking about when, if you've got a health professional, and it's not just actually a health professional, it's anybody who is talking about diabetes in a way that makes you not feel great. And you talking to them about that and trying to explain to them why perhaps that's not that's not all that helpful. If you have loved ones around you who can help you be that advocate as well, that is so wonderful. And I was talking with a friend the other day who was telling me that somebody made a slightly judgmental, but no malice behind it, but just a comment that wasn't all that helpful. And her friend, who's just been learning about lots about diabetes, actually jumped in and said, hey, that's a really unhelpful comment and this is why. And my friend was saying just how amazing that felt for her, because for a moment there, it wasn't that she had to be the advocate who had to jump in and defend herself. Actually, it was somebody else doing it. So have that conversation with your loved ones as well to see if they are happy to help you out when that sort of stuff happens.
That's a good suggestion, Renza.
Yeah. Build allies around you. I just realized that my dog is jumping around on the couch behind me. That's sooty. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Christel, as ever, I could talk to you for hours, and I'm always so grateful that we have people like you who are such incredible champions for people living with diabetes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Centre, the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, and your wonderful team there.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, we'll keep doing it. Don't think that it's off the hook. You'll come back. I would like to remind everybody that this Facebook Q&A will be available. We leave it on our sites. You can go back and look at any of them. Go back and find other ones that we've done with Christel. And please feel free to share them with anybody and keep the conversation going in the comment boxes as well. We will be back soon with another one of these. We generally do them every couple of weeks, but sometimes we do them every week if there's a topic that we know that lots of people are interested in. So please do check that out. But thank you very, very much. And Emily, we can end the broadcast now. Thank you.